Hello and welcome back to the Craft Mansion. I'm David and in today's video I'll be making the sonic screwdriver from Doctor Who. This is the screwdriver of the 11th Doctor, so it's Matt Smith, and it's the one that's green and extends and then at the end goes like this. There's those claws that go like this. I've been putting off this prop for quite some time because there's a lot of intricate pieces and there's a lot of details and there's actually a circuit involved, so it's a bit difficult to do. But I will make an effort and try to make it because I think that eventually I will gift this prop to a friend of mine. And this is the friend who actually introduced me to the Theoretically, I've already planned the things I'm going to need for this prop. I already planned the layers and different materials on my iPad, but in practice I know that some things won't be practical and modifications will need to be made. So of course this is just a rough plan, but it's good to have an idea beforehand of what I need. In fact, I already did a lot of research, well, not research, I looked through my junk. I'm just gonna move you for a bit and you can see my junk. This is, well, not my junk. You know what I mean. This is all the junk I have on these shelves. So I found a lot of cool things. In the box that holds my pens and rods, I found some really cool pens. There's two of them which have already a circuit mechanism and they light up. This one even has a laser, so I can use the circuit. Oh, and this sonic screwdriver has a tube in the middle that's green and transparent, and this biro is perfect. This is still good to use, but I'm just going to sacrifice it and use the tube because I really need it. And then there's some other stuff like the mechanism of this biro, but you'll see later on. I also went through my dad's boxes and found these pipes, different lengths and thicknesses. They're quite good as well. And then I flipped through random junk as well because random junk is quite useful, like these things I'll be using later on. Most of this prop is essentially going to be made from repurposed materials. For this video I had to bring in the big guns. Well, this is a mini big gun. I started from the back of the Sonic and cut 3 cm from a pipe that was 1.5 cm in diameter. Okay, in my defense I wasn't checking on the focus of the camera, but rather on the very sharp blade that could have easily sliced off my fingers. Using a heat gun, I heated the plastic and then pushed a widening paintbrush through it to widen one end of the pipe. But the pipe wasn't tapering enough, so I sanded down the opposite end as well. So this is the first piece. It's thinner at one end and wider at the other end. Now, according to some replicas, the whole thing is about 22 centimeters long. And luckily, from here to here there's 22 centimeters approximately, so I can just use this to scale things up. Over this piece there are some rings, and I'll be making those from this rubber tubing. By comparing it to the image, I made markings to indicate where the tubing should go. If you have a vernier caliper, I highly suggest to use it since you can easily replicate measurements with it. I cut off pieces with the right width, made scratches on both surfaces so that the glue had a better grip, and then used super glue to hold everything in place. To make the rings on the tube and the plastic, I gently cut into them using the table saw, and then sanded them for a smooth finish. There is a circle at the end of the Sonic, which I made by cutting a circle of 1 cm diameter from an old plastic card, some super glue, and it closes off the pipe. Hot glue helped in making a firmer bond. Sanded plastic has a lot of imperfections, and to reduce them I tried using resin varnish. But it took forever to dry, even overnight, and I couldn't wait that long for each coat to dry, so I removed the sticky varnish with some white spirit and then painted on 3 coats of water-based varnish which dries in minutes. So I need to make a way for the batteries to be easily changed. And this pen is the right thickness that goes inside the pipe of the first part we did, but essentially I'm going to have to destroy this pen to make it work. So I'm just cutting into this willy-nilly. I don't have any guide or anything, but look at this, I just cut exactly around the LED, and it still works. I continued cutting around it and removing any extra bits. So this works like this. There's the batteries inside and then there's this spring. The wall is metallic, so it's also conducting electricity. Then the bulb is connected to a switch over here. So if I press the switch and connect one end over there and one end to the metal, it lights up. To prevent the spring from moving, I hot glued it in place. These two could easily be separated with a soldering iron. I used hot glue and fitted the non-circuit part of the pen into the plastic pipe. Since this part will be under some tension as it will unscrew and screw in place, I added further support with some super glue. I made the larger part of the handle from a broomstick with a diameter of 2.4 cm. Oh, and by the way, if you make miniature dioramas, store sawdust like this because it can come in really handy in creating small grass. I used that technique in a previous video, which you can see over there at the top right area of your screen. The length needed was of 8 cm, and then I started narrowing different parts according to the original design. The white part of the handle has an octagonal cross section, so I divided the surface into 8, carved the wood, and used a Dremel tool to sand it smooth. The middle section has a concave shape. The battery pack needs to fit inside the handle, so I made a hole that was wide enough. As I explained before, for the green tube I used a transparent green pen, removed the extra bits, and scratched off the white print. This tube should be 11 cm long. It also needed a trigger system, and when I looked at this pen I saw the perfect opportunity. I removed the black part and separated the trigger. I scratched the surfaces and superglued them together. These need to fit inside the other end of the wooden piece, so I drilled a hole which was 4.9 cm deep, and then at the top I also made a place where the trigger could fit. It took a lot of work to make the cuts on the inside, but eventually I managed to make the trigger fit in. Then I drilled the hole from the side and made sure the trigger clicked into it. Both chambers need to be connected for wires to fit through. I drew lines where the switch needed to go and carved out a place for it as well. Then I made a channel in which a wire could fit and made 2 small holes, one at the end of the channel and another one next to the switch. For the tube to be pushed out, I need springs, and I'm going to use springs from different pens. Now luckily my dad gets a lot of promotional pens, and I do mean a lot of pens. And among these different pens, there are some who have springs of similar length and of the right length. The original plan was to find a spring that was as thick as the green pen, but I couldn't find one, so I opted for tying 3 pen springs together using nylon. I used a lighter to melt some of the string to prevent the knots from untying. For the wires I'm going to use these spare wires I had. This was like a thing with 3 different bulbs. There was red and blue and green, but I'm going to use the green one. And just to test it out without the switch, I can see that it works. Before putting any wires into their place, I stripped them. I passed one from the surface channel to the battery compartment, and another one that goes from one compartment to the other through the small hole in the middle. I soldered one wire to the side of the battery holder and the other one to the spring. I added hot glue to the metal and quickly pushed in the part in place, keeping in mind to tug gently on the wires to pull them through the holes without dislodging them. For further strength, I poured some super glue over the 2 parts. I fitted another wire through the hole that was next to the switch and soldered it to the switch. I cut the wire that goes into the surface channel to the right length and soldered it to the switch as well. The wires I had weren't long enough, so I simply soldered some pieces together and then covered the exposed areas with shrinking tubes. I cut the wires to the right length and then soldered the green LED to them. This large area should be plastic and the smaller area at the other end should be metal. So I gave the wood 3 coats of water-based varnish to make it smoother. Now next up I need some parts from a lip balm or a lip saver or whatever you call it. It's old and it's empty, and I'm going to need this cap over here and the middle part over here. I divided the circumference into 8 and then connected each alternating pair of lines with a perpendicular line 1.3 cm away from the closed end of the cap. These closed areas were not needed, so I used my Dremel tool to cut them off. Since the green pen needs to fit through this end, I drilled a hole. Then I also needed the part that fits inside the blue cap and the pipe that fits inside the previous part. But since I didn't have one narrow enough, I just modified one on my own. Some super glue and these go together like this. I did all of this to be able to guide the green pen when coming out. These areas would eventually become very hard to paint, so I painted them with a copper color beforehand. I also painted the blue cap with grey primer and the inside copper. Once I was sure the wires were in place, I put the 3 springs in all the way towards the bottom and the green pen on top. Then I glued on the plastic ring with super glue, and on top of that the lip saver cap. I bent a small plastic pipe into a ring and glued it round the wood. This is already shaping up to be one of my most favorite props. It's not perfect, for example there's this part over here that's a bit bent, but it's homemade and the wires might give out at any given time, but I hope it works long enough that I can gift it to my friend without it being broken. That being said, the hardest part is now over because now all that's left is the top part. The claws should look something like this. I traced the shape 4 times onto 5mm thick wood and cut them. This wood was ideal for cutting as it is very soft, but that meant it wasn't as strong. So I let some super glue soak in to get the desired durability. I drilled holes on which they could swivel, and once finished I gave them a coat of varnish. Then I painted a coat of grey primer and a coat of silver. I brought back the black plastic card and cut the brackets on which the claws would swivel. They're like a rectangle with semicircles on both ends. I made 2 wedges and then bent them into a U shape. Finally, 2 holes to correspond with those on the claws. One of the pens was 1.2 cm in diameter, perfect size, so I cut off a chunk of 1.7 cm out of it. The brackets go on it like so. Since the inside would be hard to paint later on, I gave them 2 coats of silver. To connect them to the claws, I removed the tube from a spray can tap and cut 4 small pieces. Upon testing with the lip saver cap, I realized the claws needed to be thicker at the bottom end to fully close, so I added a piece of plastic and painted it as well. Then I fitted the claws in and put the tube through. Be careful to only add super glue to the outer part and leave the claws free. The tube should be flat to the bracket. Next step, making the claws spring out. So I needed, more springs. A lot of super glue later, and the springs were fixed on. There are 4 silver parts that interlock into the 4 empty spaces cut from the lip saver cap. I used a pipe 2.5 cm in diameter and cut vertical slices from it. At one end I added 2 more layers of the pipe and flushed everything smooth by cutting off the excess. I also removed a 45-degree cut. This was the top end. I know it's all a bit confusing, can you actually imagine planning this? But it will sort out in the end, I promise. At the bottom end I glued on 4 layers, as these need to reach in between the lip saver slots to the green pen. I had this nut looking thing from an old computer, and I cut 4 rectangles from it which were 2.8 cm long, and as wide as the previously finished plastic pieces. I glued them on and removed the excess from the sides. I temporarily put the claws on the rest of the Sonic, so I could attach these 4 parts onto it. To make the part at the top that actually lights up, I decided to use hot glue. So I grabbed some of the excess that had just melted out of the gun and cut it roughly into a sphere. To remove those rough edges of the cuts, I simply heated the glue. Then I made the base by pouring a small pile of hot glue. Both of them go together like that, and from the bottom I made a hole into which the LED would go. This thing is obviously green, so I mixed some white glue with green food coloring, painted it on and left it to dry, and then repeated that twice more. All the pieces were finally finished, so it was time to paint everything. Part of the handle is covered with 2mm EVA craft foam. Now, there was a problem with the trigger, because a wire kept preventing it from clicking into place, and sometimes it had to be removed manually. So I had to keep this hole open just in case this wire needed to be pushed. I made a button-like thing to push the trigger from some scrap pieces of plastic glued together. I superglued it to a strip of masking tape and then glued this to the Sonic. This way the button could be flipped to reveal the trigger hole. To conceal it as best as I could, I painted it black. I fitted the top part over the handle and glued them together from the top. Some more hot glue and on goes the green bit. It looks like a very weird green nipple. From the bottom, these silver parts were glued to the green pen, and the 11th Doctor's sonic screwdriver was ready for sonicking. I bit off a bit more than I could chew with this prop because although the spring mechanism still works, the trigger won't lock in place, so now I cannot have it lock and then pressing the trigger and it snapping out like this. But if I had to choose between the spring mechanism working and the light, I would have chosen the light because the green is quite iconic with this sonic screwdriver. I also put new batteries in, that's why the light is even better. I have 3 larger batteries instead of the 4 smaller ones. I'm not sure what they are, they're just the same size but thicker, and they fit, and they produced a brighter light. Also, the spring that was with the batteries also broke off. It's not soldered to the rest of the circuit, it's just there, so of course it's not secure, but it's still working, so that's okay. Now, since this is a gift, I also made a cute little box. Well, I had a box and then I did the Doctor Who logo from the 5th season, I think. And then inside there's foam, and then over here there's 11 Doctor sonic screwdriver and the place for the sonic screwdriver because this has a lot of small bits and I would hate for them to break off. Now you can see the reaction this prop got.
عندي شي حاجة هيك.
Oh my god. Oh my god.
ده homemade أما. فصوّك. It is.
Oh my god.
See, it's a lightsaber. Oh, no, it's a sonic screwdriver. Sorry. It's a sonic screwdriver.
If you like how this prop turned out, please give this video a thumbs up and leave a comment down below what you think I should do next. And you can also ring the notification bell to stay updated with my future videos. If you haven't already, here is the subscribe button, and these are some more videos from my channel. And until next time, this is the 11th Doctor sonic screwdriver. I'm David, and this is the Craftmansion. Geronimo!